This podcast is brought to you by Mapper Forward's new Patreon community, the Global Coffee Think Tank. Check the show notes or head to patreon.com/mapperforward to find out how you can become a member today. Welcome to the Daily Coffee Pro by Mapper Forward, friends. I'm your host, Lee Safar, and today we have a real treat. Today we are joined by Muki Yeung. Muki, welcome to the podcast. It's such a treat to have you back after so long.
Pleasure to be here. Pleasure to actually be in the same country as you as well.
Yeah, we've both been recent returners to Australia, and the world has changed since then. And you are living in a different country than the first time you came on the podcast. You are living in Kenya now, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And you're back visiting Australia just briefly. We happened to bump into each other at Mice last week, and I could not pass up the opportunity to have you back on the podcast because we haven't really heard a lot about what's going on in Kenya over the past couple of years. And through this series, we're going to talk about the Kenyan coffee value chain and where it's at today. Before we do look at what today's episode is about, which is what has Kenya experienced as a value chain over the past few years, why don't you remind everyone what you do?
So I am the specialty coffee trader at Dormans Coffee in Kenya, though I do also work out of Rwanda and Tanzania. I've been with Dormans since December 2019. Prior to that, I worked with Condesa Colab, an importer based in Sydney, Australia. And there was a few-year stint where I was at Capricornio Coffees in Paraná, Brazil, where I was undertaking a management training program through the group. So I picked up, well, I've been in the coffee industry for more than 10 years now. I can never remember exactly how long, but it's been long enough, I think. With a good chunk of that involved in green coffee, and quite a number of years now at origin level.
Perfect. That sets the stage perfectly for what we want to talk about, because it's been a really challenging year and continues to be challenging for the coffee value chain off the back of a few years of a lot of discombobulation from different origin countries with regards to coffee. What has Kenya experienced over the past 3 years with the pandemic and with constant change as a value chain?
When COVID first hit, just prior to that, our season was during that time COVID was really just beginning to come in. And I remember joining in December, I only had a couple of weeks to settle in before our main buying season began, which is from around January through to March. And we had many, many, many visitors come through. So something Dormans and Kenya in general is famous for is having gigantic cupping tables, so hundreds upon hundreds of coffees at a time. And many people like to come and physically cup. It's a nice country to visit. It's easier than many of the other origins to visit. And it's such a great way to learn, to be physically there as well. It's a unique experience to be there with buyers from all over the world cupping together. So I was thrown into the deep end to pick up this system, to meet all these people as well. And there were whispers of this virus going around, but I guess being in Africa, you're exposed to Ebola, to malaria, to all these other viruses or diseases that are more or less the norm, that this was just another thing that I think at that point in time, I remember in January and February seeing people and for them saying, nah, it's not going to be anything, it'll just be a little blip, it'll disappear. So it felt regular at that time. It was me just trying to get to grips with how the country worked, the qualities that we were dealing with, trying to manage so many people of
Mm.
all different cultures, all at the same time. And then all of a sudden, we hit March, and that's when we had the first case in Kenya. And that was when things started to get serious.
Mm-hmm.
So it just went into boom, lockdown, and people were being sent. My friends who worked for the UN, for embassies, other private businesses in Kenya, all of a sudden were all sent away. And there's this one moment I remember we were hanging out on a weekend, and this news had come up, and we said, "Nah, it'll be okay. We'll be in this together. We'll survive it."
Right.
But we couldn't even make our own decisions.
Mm-hmm.
It became not even a few days later, there's that realization of we're not in control of anything.
Yep.
We have to, they had no choice. If their companies are sending them back home, if their employers were shooting them back home, they have to do it.
Mm-hmm.
So then all of us were suddenly separated. In coffee, that led to, I think there was that brief moment where we didn't know what was going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
I had not not a great deal, but some buyers, particularly towards the latter end, who just had to give up their commitments. They had already come all the way to cup coffee. They selected, they purchased. We were getting ready to put it on a ship, and they had to pull out. And I think at that point, we could only be we just had to be understanding and
Mm-hmm.
accepting of it, because we didn't know where the world was going to go at that point.
Mm-hmm.
Would we even be able to continue to sell coffee, to purchase coffee? Will there be consumers for it? That I think it quickly settled down, but that brief 2 to 3 months after March 2020, that was, I think, the most frightening period during COVID.
Yeah.
Before any government figured out what they were doing, uh, it makes sense. People were just
Uncertain.
being uncertain, and yeah, it's understandable to be risk adverse during
Mm-hmm.
those times. Um, from that point, a few months in, it quickly became apparent that coffee was not going to be affected, and if anything, there was a huge boom. I think from that March, I would say 3 to 6 months later is when things just went a bit crazy. That people, uh, it's very clear. I think it's a behavior that we saw in prior recessions and times of uncertainty. That if you cannot enjoy the life that you had lived,
Mm-hmm.
to be able to go out to eat or to enjoy life's little pleasures, you're going to make up for it in some of the way. And the benefit of the time that we're living in now is that many of us were very lucky to be able to continue to work, to stay connected.
Right.
And particularly in a place like Australia, I don't think many Australians feel this, but it was better than many countries around the world, that you did have the
Yep.
government looking after you in some way. And that was not the case in Kenya. It's not the case for many countries in
Mm-hmm.
Africa. If you had to stop work, you weren't making any money. There was no kind of support.
Mm-hmm.
So on that end, many countries like the United States of America, like Australia, people could still continue to order coffee, to drink it at home. And we're very lucky that because they weren't spending that same amount of money on travel or going to the cinema or eating out, many people chose to spend it on better quality coffee.
Mm-hmm.
So we had quite a boom in interest in high quality,
Kenyan coffee.
fairly expensive Kenyan coffee over the last couple of years.
And how was that experience for producers as they were experiencing the uncertainty of COVID in the beginning? were they nervous, or did they have a level-headedness about it?
I probably shouldn't be surprised by it, but many people just wanted to get on with life.
Wow.
It was just another thing. These are very, very tough people who've lived through huge changes in their country. Many farmers that I deal with are 60 plus.
Mm-hmm.
So they saw living through colonialization, independence. They would have known people in their families to have died from things like malaria, from dysentery, cholera, yellow fever, smallpox, polio, all these things that we've only just sort of fixed to a certain degree over the last couple of years, that this was just another thing. And people just got on with life where they could.
And did they maintain that? Did they maintain that mindset as the pandemic progressed?
There was a point that people definitely began dying because you do have an older generation.
Mm-hmm.
But it didn't, from the numbers that I remember were coming out of Kenya, it didn't affect people in the country as much as people within Nairobi city.
Mm-hmm.
So there's still many people that I meet today out in farms, in coffee growing territory that are quite older, 60 upwards, and they're still around, they're still working, they're physically fit, and they're just getting on with it. So this is just another thing to add to the diary, another thing to tell the grandkids.
Yeah, my family in Syria kind of took the same approach because they had just come out of, or were coming out of, a civil war, and then COVID hit, and I would speak to them and they would be like, yeah, this is not the hardest thing that we will have endured over the past couple of decades. And they were like, we just got to get on with it and figure it out. And it's this resilience that you cultivate through going through hard things, where when hard things show up, you just keep figuring out how to show up for them. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah.
And so it sounds like these producers who were producing higher end specialty coffee actually saw a boom as the pandemic progressed.
Yes. So, well, in general, we're very lucky in Kenya that the majority of our coffee is so good. It is above average compared to many other countries.
Mm-hmm.
It is higher valued than many other countries. And to the benefit of Kenya over the last season, we've also had an increase in production. Very, very minor compared to somewhere like Brazil, but still a small increase. And the prices have been better than average. So I think if in coffee anyway, it's been a benefit to Kenya the last couple of years.
Okay. In this, we're going to head into the next episode, and we're going to talk about where Kenyan coffee is today. I think I also want to ask you in the next episode to expand a little bit more on that comment of why Kenyan coffees are usually of better quality and fetching more prices. I think our audience would really value hearing that perspective from a seasoned professional like you. Okay?
Yep.
Great. Awesome. We'll see you in the next episode, everybody. Peace, love, and peanut butter. Have an amazing rest of your day. Thanks, friends. If you enjoyed this video, here's what you should check out next. Consider supporting Mapper Forward on Patreon, and be sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell before you leave.